Hi everybody, thank you for joining me again today. This is Mickey and this is Mickey's Munch and Learn. Today I wanted to talk about cybersecurity and cyber attacks, in particular ransomware attacks. In the press recently in the US, there's been a lot more attacks happening on healthcare providers, in particular because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is really alarming because what ransomware attackers are doing is actually using this to extrapolate money from healthcare providers, and in itself, I wouldn't say I would condone the activity, but what's worse about targeting healthcare providers is that it actually affects patient care, because what ransomware does, it actually locks you out of your systems, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Now, what I wanted to talk to you about is some of the things, first of all, that's happening in the world around ransomware and why you need to think a little bit harder about the investments you make around protecting yourself against ransomware attacks. One of the things that the FBI has said that $1 billion has been spent in actually making payments to ransomware demands, and that's just the amount that's actually been recorded. So that's coming from the FBI. Last year, in 2019, Baltimore City had to pay out $18 million in ransomware payments to release patient records because ransomware had come in, an attack had happened and actually locked out patient file systems, and it was affecting patient care. So it was more important to get patient care rolling than it was to try and negotiate with the ransomware organizations. Now, the thing about ransomware, why are they particularly targeting healthcare organizations? A few $1 million in ransom payment demands is far less than what it would be to value a life lost. So what we're finding that healthcare providers in particular are paying up because it's not worth the ensuing lawsuits that may result in lack of patient healthcare because a healthcare provider couldn't protect their systems from a ransomware attack. This is really important to sort of point out. So every 11 seconds there is a ransomware attack in either commercial, financial services. Financial services used to be a big target, but it's shifting more towards government and healthcare these days. And healthcare in particular, like I said, because what do? Do you pay or do you sit and negotiate while a patient's life is in jeopardy because you can't get records across to a provider in another part of the world? So 284 million ransomware attacks were reported in 2018, and that's just those that have been reported. Ransomware comes from phishing emails, which has increased by 98% in 2017 and continues to increase. And what that means is that it's an unsuspecting user that clicks on an email and causes this to happen. Phishing emails are responsible for about 91% of total cyber attacks that take place, including ransomware. So this is just to help you understand this. So 77% of corporate ransomware victims were running up-to-date endpoint security. Now this is important. So, you've got these security software providers, antivirus software providers, endpoint security. Actually, 77% of attacks took place with those organizations with the endpoint security implemented and in place. Now the thing about endpoint security, what I'm going to tell you, it can only protect you against what is known out there or what the endpoint security company has provided you protection against. What you're not protected against is the ever increasing ways in which ransomware attackers are finding new ways to penetrate your organization, creating new code, creating new emails that your endpoint security company just doesn't know about. So endpoint security is great against ransomware attacks which you know about, but what about those that you don't know about? It's not really going to help you 100%. So 76% of cyber attacks are actually financially motivated. They're holding you up for money, and that's something that you've got to understand. That's something that I guess these criminals want from you, is to extrapolate money from you. And 98% of cyber payments are used by using Bitcoin because Bitcoin is just untraceable. So the criminals are using the Bitcoin currency, the computer currency or the digital currency to take payments. You just can't track where their payments are going. So you can't catch these cyber criminals very, very easily. So what's important to understand from this is that your existing endpoint security is not 100% protecting you. And this is why we've seen a recent increase in the last few weeks of healthcare providers being attacked and ransomware demands being made of them. Like I said, in healthcare and in government, you may not have the time as a public servant to actually wait and negotiate with a ransomware attacker. Quite often, you're falling prey to actually having to pay so you can get access to your data. So, what is a ransomware attack? Let me just describe that for you. Obviously, you have a criminal depicted by this chappie here. And they create an email, which is what we call a phishing email, with some what we call a Trojan horse code in there. And they send this email to you as the unsuspecting user. And for you, it just looks like a normal email. It could even look like it's come from one of your colleagues inside the organizations. That's how good this is. But as the unsuspecting recipient of this email, you go ahead and you click the button to open the email. And next minute, this code pops out and it infects your computer. It grabs hold of your ERP application and actually goes ahead and locks your database and locks all your data, and then pops up this message, as you see on the screen, that we have your data, we want some money. So what have they actually done? The criminals have loaded some code onto your computer, accessed your private data or internal corporate data or healthcare records, and have encrypted it. And what they're asking you to do is to pay up, and they'll give you the de-encryption key. That's what they're doing. And it's all because you had an unsuspecting email that in many cases looked like came from a trusted colleague. So just a few more statistics. These are some of the countries and the reported attacks that they've reported over the last year or so. The industries that are most affected, in fact, government organizations are the most targeted for ransomware attacks. However, healthcare has started to rise quite rapidly. You'll see this healthcare is quite low, but it actually started to come up recently because of COVID-19, particularly because the records that the ransomware attackers are targeting are affecting patient care. So the most common way that a ransomware attack happens is through spam or a phishing email, and that's 67%. So it's not even something you can necessarily avoid. And like I said, your endpoint security, that's your virus checking, doesn't necessarily protect you from the actual ransom attacks that are not known about. So systems most targeted by ransomware attacks. So unfortunately, Microsoft Windows is a big target. Mac OS is, Android and iOS on iPhones. These are the top OSs actually targeted by ransomware attacks. Now, it's not just a computer that's actually targeted. You've also got SaaS applications, and here's some of the top targeted SaaS applications in the marketplace, which are also targeted by ransomware attackers. Dropbox, Office 365, G Suite, Box, and Salesforce. Because at the end of the day, you're going to be opening up an email which links you back to the systems. It comes to the SaaS application, penetrates your internal systems. So it's not just what's on your desktop which gets attacked. It can be a SaaS provider as well. So the average cost per ransomware incident has gone up on a year by year basis. In 2020, in Q1 of this year, the average cost of ransomware being paid out per incident, that is not in its entirety, is about just under $300,000 per incident. But don't forget, this goes into the millions of dollars. Last year, Baltimore City, as I said earlier, spent $18 million in payouts for ransomware attackers. Some of the things you've got to watch out for: IoT devices in the future, social media and utility infrastructure are all going to be targets for ransomware attackers. And this is going to be interesting because, particularly in the utility sector, if you are a hospital or a healthcare provider and you lose utilities, electricity, gas, that could be quite devastating, particularly when you've got patients on intensive care. Financial services, you could actually lose a lot of money if your systems go down, your trading floors go down. It could be quite traumatic. So ransomware attackers is a big problem, and it's increasing, and it's getting more and more prevalent And like I said, I remind you again, endpoint security from your existing security provider doesn't necessarily cover you for ransomware attacks which haven't been known about yet. And that's the biggest problem. So how could you protect against ransomware attacks? So one of the things you could do is create some sort of isolation. So on your existing computer, the access point where you get the email, if you could create an isolation layer which stops any ransomware attack penetrating internal systems, that could be a better way than actually trying to work out what ransomware code is going to come in next. So with endpoint security, it works if they know about what the code is that's coming in. But what if you don't know? How do you just sort of isolate yourself from any attack? Well, we at Oracle have got this technology called VirtualBox. And with VirtualBox, you can actually install this on your existing device, laptop, and actually isolate off your sensitive data system. So in this case, it could be your ERP system or your healthcare application. You can isolate that off on a 256-bit encrypted section of your machine. Well, what did that do for you? Well, now, when your hacker comes in and he sends you an email, and just like before, you have no reason to suspect why you shouldn't open it. In this case, when you click the open to open the email and the attachment, this time, because you've isolated off the actual internal system, maybe your healthcare system, your ERP system, that code which goes and locks up your database or your data is now no longer able to traverse over to your internal systems. This is in essence what VBox does. It creates this isolation layer. Now the great thing is, you don't have to go in and start replacing all your existing desktops and systems. You can send this in and install it remotely and just get it up and running and isolate your sensitive data systems. So what is VBox? It's really, really simple. It's been around for a long, long time. It's almost like 20 years it's been around. And it's a fully supported product which not many people know about. But we have a lot of users, millions of users across the world using VBox for this type of security. What VBox essentially does is actually creates a 256-bit encrypted encapsulation on your existing desktop. In that encapsulation, you can then launch multiple operating systems, a Windows desktop, a Linux desktop, an Apple desktop, all isolated from the general internet. So when an email comes in or you're surfing the internet, you're not in the same zone as where your internal systems are. It installs on your existing operating system with no rebuild required. So if you have a Linux desktop, an Apple desktop, or if you have a Windows desktop, you don't have to go and buy a new laptop. You can remote install this. That's the interesting thing. You can, as an admin or as an organization, you can actually remote install this isolation layer on your existing desktop quite easily. It allows for a secondary desktop to be run isolated on the same system. So what do I mean? You may want to choose to actually make your main system a Linux-based system, which is not as prone to attack to ransomware attackers as Microsoft Windows or Apple. So if you have your main system that serves the internet running on Linux, you can then create this isolation layer which runs your Windows system to access your internal systems. I hope that made sense. So you're not running your application on Linux, you're just running internet services on Linux. So maybe run Oracle Linux on your base operating system and then run Windows within this isolated area. That would take a reinstall. But if you just wanted to protect your systems quickly, you could create this isolation layer very, very quickly and run a second Windows desktop within your Windows desktop, which is totally isolated from your laptop or your desktop. So it allows for isolation from the public network on the same desktop. So if you've got a system which is going out to the internet and is getting emails out from the public internet or from around the organization, it allows you to isolate internet traffic from internal protected data traffic. So it just means that you can restrict any cross-proliferation of what we call viruses or Trojan horses or the ransomware attack when it comes in from the internet. It defends against new and existing ransomware attacks or cyber attacks, because what you're doing is creating a layer of isolation. It's much like a moat around a castle. You know, the drawbridge is drawn up, and it doesn't matter how good you are, you have to find a way to get across the river, to get across the moat. Little basic simple security. So even though your endpoint security can pick up on existing ransomware attacks, what happens if there's a new one? You really want to try and stop it until your endpoint security provider can provide a way of removing it. So what this solution does, it allows you to get time to reach out to your endpoint security provider, report a new ransomware attack, knowing that your internal systems have not been attacked, even though it has landed on your desktop. It gives you time. So there's not this instant when you open up the email, it attacks and locks up your internal systems and encrypts your data, and then you get a ransomware demand. This is really, really important. So this is an extra layer of security. It doesn't cost a lot of money. It can be remote installed on your existing Microsoft, Apple desktops, or if you wanted to go that extra layer further, you could actually make your main desktop Linux and run your Microsoft on top of that. VBox from Oracle Linux. It will help you with your ransomware challenges that are happening. And don't forget, recently, healthcare has started to rise to the number 1 and number 2 position, as well as government, as organizations being attacked for ransomware. Ransomware is not big enough in their demands in terms of dollar amount that they're actually demanding of you to make it worthwhile you negotiating with them. They're making it in small enough increments, it's quicker and easier and better to pay. Because patient healthcare or government service is far more valuable than actually negotiating, just paying the money. So if you're in government and one of your defense systems gets locked out, what do you want? Would you pay somebody $500,000? It's nothing compared to having your country's defences going. If you're in healthcare, if somebody demands $500,000, what's $500,000 to protecting somebody's life? So ransomware attackers are getting away with this because they're not making their dollar demands big enough that it makes sense to negotiate. The repercussions of negotiating are far bigger than just paying. Implementing VBox gives you that breathing space, that time to allow your endpoint security provider get you a fix to remove that ransomware attack, while still isolating your internal systems and protecting it from taking on that Trojan horse. This is Mickey. I hope this has been useful. And please take a look at VBox to enhance your endpoint security solution and protect yourself against cyber attacks and security attacks for your internal systems. Thank you for listening, and I hope it's been useful.